And good evening, everybody, and welcome to Risk Adjustment Weekly Q&A for August 1st, 2019, where it is 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, and 5 Pacific, unless you're in the Hawaiian Islands, and it's 2 o'clock. We do ask you to remain muted unless you are asking a question or directly participating, with the presenter. Your background becomes our foreground. Pins dropping, papers rustling, keyboards typing, doors slamming, babies crying, dogs barking, TVs and radios blaring, and the occasional obscenity all become the foreground. So while you are not actively asking a question or participating, we ask that you remain muted, and we appreciate your cooperation on that. We have a new CRC to report this week. Karen Paradis, and congratulations to Karen. And when you earn your CRC, we encourage you to join our Wall of Fame. And you can do so by emailing us at ratraining@compliantcodingsystems.com. We ask you to include your name and all your credentials, including that brand spanking new CRC, a photo, a brief bio that you write, and you may include contact information for public display. That is completely optional, and that is completely up to you. Could be a cell phone number, email address, whatever you choose. The advantage to doing so is visitors to the Wall of Fame may be hiring decision makers looking for candidates, and they may want to contact you. So again, the contact information is completely optional at your discretion, but you may do so. And have you ever seen For the Record magazine? This is the website here. Note the URL, fortherecordmag.com. No, we are not selling you a magazine subscription. We are telling you that you can get it for free. Okay? I have used For the Record magazine as a reference, a resource for well over a decade. They've got great articles, great resources, great information. And if you are a member of AHIMA or AAPC, you can get your subscription for free. So we encourage you to go to fortherecordmag.com, go to the subscribe page, which is right here on your screen. And again, you will be able to subscribe for free. It so happens that I am featured in an interview in the August issue. We advertise in For the Record magazine, great publication, and we're not selling you a subscription. We are telling you how you can get this very worthwhile resource for free. Some other proud partners: CodersDirect.com is a source for medical coders. It's a free searchable database of certified AAPC and AHIMA coders that are seeking coding opportunities with healthcare organizations. Coders can post resumes for free, employers can search them for free, and it all happens at CodersDirect.com. So, if you are searching for an opportunity or if you are searching for a candidate, we highly recommend that you visit Coders Direct and add that to your resources. And find a code. Fast, simple, and current. And I always add powerful. Find a code, as you will see on the next slide momentarily, offers various suites of different coding, HIM, and revenue cycle resources. A terrific product. And the website is findacode.com. And if you go to findacode.com, you will arrive at the pricing page here. You see these check marks in the three right-hand columns. They go off the viewable display page here, so that's why we encourage you to visit Find a Code. And if you like this professional package, which you can see is $350 a year, you can get that through us if you are an Academy registrant for $145. And so why not visit Find a Code, check out the wares here. And again, if you find that you like the professional package, email us at support@compliantcodingsystems.com. We'll be happy to send you the link where you can save 2/3 off of that price and get it for $145. We do want to remind you the purpose of Tuesday evening study hour is, pardon me, there's a pop-up on my screen here. The purpose of Tuesday evening study hour is not to represent the contents of our program. Study hour is your time for your questions. It's a forum. It is not a class. It's not an instructional webinar. It is a forum for you. So bring your questions and your discussion. You may submit questions through the Learning Portal. You can go to Messages and select the administrator as the recipient, or you can email them to ratraining@compliantcodingsystems.com. We do offer a study tip, a long-standing study tip. We offer this every week if you are studying for the exam. And we have been told that this has been worthwhile advice, so we continue to share it. That is, be prepared for concepts and not for questions, okay? Obviously, the key to demonstrating a high level of proficiency and command of knowledge in a subject is thorough mastery of concepts and their component parts. There is a tendency on some people's part, and I'll explain in a moment why, studying for specific questions will only be of value if you're asked the question that you prepared for, where studying and mastering concepts best prepares a professional to answer a much wider variety of questions regardless of wording or context. So here's the backstory to this. If you're in our full program, you know that after each module there's two assessments, a self-assessment and a CEU post-test. We have our mock exam. We offer the AAPC practice test for the exam. We offer the AAPC study guide, which has questions in it. You may be taking some, questions from other sources. You may be taking pre-employment tests. So by the time you get to the exam, you very likely may have answered well over 1,000 questions without exaggeration. And there is this, I call it human nature tendency on a lot of people's part to take a question they've gotten incorrect, remember the question, remember the 4 choices, remember the correct choice, and that'll work 100% of the time if you're asked exactly that question with exactly those 4 choices, perhaps exactly in that order. It will not work very well in other instances. If the question is changed, the wording of the question is changed, if the different answer selections are changed, then it's not likely to be a successful approach. Okay, so if you get a question wrong on an assessment, take a step back and ask yourself, well, what is this question dealing with? Is it dealing with a guideline? Is it dealing with a coding scenario? Is it dealing with trumping? Is it dealing with the different hierarchies? Is it dealing with quality and stars? What is it dealing with? And then make sure you're strong in that concept. Make sure you reinforce your overall knowledge of that concept. Okay, and that way, if context or wording or whatever is changed, you should be well prepared to answer just about any question. Okay, so don't drill down and get tunnel vision down to the wording of the question. Take a step back, look at what the topic or the area of the question is coming from, and ask yourself, are you strong in that in that overall area? The AAPC Code of Ethics prohibits discussing in specific terms details of the exam, and of course we would not want to do that. We want everybody to go in there and pass on their own accord based on their knowledge of risk adjustment. Okay. But the exam has historically had what many agree are problematic questions. I experienced this when I took the exam 1 month after it was first released. And our feedback is that this continues to this day. Okay. What are problematic questions? Examples of problematic questions might be questions that have no apparent correct answer, questions with more than one correct answer, and of course, on a multiple choice test, the answer key will only mark one as correct. So what do you do if you have got 2 correct answers? Questions asking for subjective opinion rather than fact-based answers. I remember several of these that just, really drove me crazy. And so when you get to a problematic question, it is likely to cause either self-doubt, frustration, or anger. One of those three. Okay. And folks, the estimates on how many of these problematic questions that exist are anywhere between 1 and 3 dozen. That's between 12 and 36. So if you have 12 to 36 questions that cause you self-doubt, if they cause you frustration, if they cause you anger, it can actually undermine your success on the exam. It can impact your success. So we want to caution you that this may exist, and try and groom your mindset before exam day to deal with this should you encounter it. Okay, so you need to address every question on the exam as a question on its own, and if there is any concern, any self-doubt, any frustration, any anger, you need to leave that at the question that causes it. And you may have to repeat this repeatedly, okay? But if you allow whatever emotion it creates, self-doubt, frustration, or anger, if you allow that to build, it can cloud your judgment to answer questions that may not necessarily be problematic. So the simple message is, do not let this snowball and become an obstacle. You need to be able to recognize problematic questions, answer the best that you can, and do not let it develop into a frenzy of self-doubt, okay, or frustration or anger. Folks, there's 150 questions on the test. You're allowed 5 hours and 40 minutes, and every question is worth 0.6, okay? No question is worth more, no question is worth less. So if you reach a question that is troubling you, okay, it is worth 0.6, and it's not worth spending so much time on that you work yourself up into a frenzy, and it's not worth spending so much time on that you run out of time on the exam and leave 20 questions blank, okay, or have to guess on 20 questions. So remember, each question is worth 0.6, folks. Do not let a question that's worth 0.6 become worth 10 points, by spending too much time, by letting it anguish you, okay? Every question is worth 0.6. And again, should you encounter multiple questions that cause you frustration, self-doubt, or anger, you need to be able to move on, fill in the answer, just move on, and again, do not let any sentiment of self-doubt, frustration, or anger build and impair your judgment on answering other questions. Okay. I also want to say that you are allowed 5 hours and 40 minutes. And if you have taken primarily the CPC is an exam that most people take first, and that exam covers a broader spectrum, and it being the first exam, people have a first exam jitters, etc. So, most people are finishing the CRC exam with much time to spare. I mean, if I had to quote an average, I'm hearing 3 to 3.5 hours. So, because it's a much more focused knowledge set, a lot more know it or you don't kind of thing. So, you really shouldn't run into danger of running out of time. But again, each question is worth 0.6. Do not let a question that's worth 0.6 all of a sudden become worth 10 points because it has impacted your ability to answer other questions or you run out of time. Okay. Our first question tonight is, I was asked this question: is morbid obesity unspecified weighted? It has been a while since I've seen this, and I was not sure how to answer it. I thought, did they mean it can be coded without a BMI, or are they referring to an HCC? Thanks for your help. So on this question, there are some examples where an unspecified code will not risk adjust. Major depressive disorder, unspecified, will not risk adjust unless the episode and severity are included. We need that specificity for major depressive disorder to risk adjust, but morbid obesity, even unspecified, is going to risk adjust. Okay, so if you have the code for morbid obesity, that will risk adjust, and you do not necessarily need the BMI. The BMI is a lot of times used as meat. Okay, but if the provider in the HPI states, patient presents is morbidly obese. If in the exam section, they during in the abdominal exam, they mention morbidly obese down in the assessment and plan. Very rarely do you not see a BMI with the vitals, but it does happen. And so, yes, morbid obesity does risk adjust, and the unspecified code here does not impact whether it risk adjusts as it does with some other conditions. So definitely hope that helps answer the question. I hope we understood the question right. I hope there wasn't more behind this than is what in black and white here. So good. I see thank you. So I'm imagining that must mean that that was helpful. Our next question. I would like clarification on coding the following. A patient is diagnosed with MDD, recurrent, severe, without psychotic features. And it's funny, I didn't even recall that this was on the next slide when I said it, but here we have MDD, and you see recurrent, severe. It has the episode and the severity, so that's going to risk adjust. Where if this just said a patient is diagnosed with MDD and alcohol dependence, then the MDD would not risk adjust. But let's stay with this question. A patient is diagnosed with MDD, recurrent, severe, without psychotic features, and alcohol dependence with a blood alcohol of 202. I believe the following ICD-10 codes would be F33.2, F10.24, and Y90.7. I am questioning my thoughts on the F10.24. I selected the more specific alcohol dependence code as it should or would fall under the WITH guidelines. Would you concur with the 3 selected diagnosis codes? And Sharon wrote the answer to this question, so I'm going to ask her to chime in after I read the answer, but she definitely agrees with all 3 codes for your coding scenario. The F33.2, the F10.24, and the Y90.7. And she has added a note. Good job on paying attention to detail. Do you have anything to add, Sharon?
So to code this scenario correctly, you really need a very high level of detail to attention to detail, because now if you look at MDD recurrent severe without psychotic features, that's pretty straightforward. That's F33.2. But if you are, if you just stop right there, okay, that's one diagnosis. Second diagnosis is alcohol dependence, and then you assign the code for alcohol dependence unspecified, then it will be incorrect, because if you actually index alcohol dependence, well, you index dependence, alcohol or alcoholism, and then there is actually a WIF, and under the WIF, you can find mood disorder, which major depressive disorder would fall under this with mood disorder, and therefore the code for alcohol dependence here is F10.24. So that's great job on coding this correctly.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the person who asked the question, and we hope that helps. And we have a third question here. Can you clarify coagulation defect documentation requirements? The note in question includes coagulation defect in the assessment and warfarin in the medication list. They are not linked. There is no further discussion on the condition in the note. Can we code D68.9 based on that documentation alone, or do we need additional information like an indication from the provider that the condition is due to something? And so you'll see the answer in green here. If the organization you work for does not provide instruction on using medications from a medication list to support diagnoses, we need MEET to capture coagulation defect. Look for provider documentation of ordering or discussing a lab test such as a prothrombin time or PT, partial thromboplastin time, PTT, or complete gut blood count, CBC, or referral to hematology. Warfarin can be prescribed for various conditions, so it is not appropriate for coders to make the clinical judgment on why it was prescribed unless your organization instructs otherwise. And for those who have been with us for a long time, you certainly may have heard my position. Any coder under my direction is forbidden from using medication list alone and assuming what a medication for is prescribed for or relating it to a diagnosis that does not have MEET. Okay. And I'm a very firm believer in, taking a medication that is not indicated in the medication list as to what it was prescribed for, or taking a condition in an assessment and plan or other part of the note and saying, oh, well, there's a medication there that treats that. It must have been prescribed for that. That is out of the scope of practice of a coder. Okay. That said, CMS has never addressed the use of the medication list. Okay. So, yes, I saw your note, Linda, and we'll certainly have you clarify in a moment. But if your organization allows you to use the medication list, and make determinations or make connections, then certainly you also know that we always tell you to follow your organizational guidelines. We provide information based on our best practices and our experience, but we never intend to supersede any organization's directions to their staff. So again, if your organization allows you to use medications from a medication list, then certainly work within the parameters of your organization's policies and procedures. So Linda, did you have more to add to this, or?
Yes, I did want to clarify. So I had this on a couple charts, and I'm getting mixed information. I look up defect and then coagulation, and it takes me right to D68.9. And I'm looking at coding clinics, and people are telling me that just those words, you cannot code from it. The wording has to say coagulation defect due to something in order to code it. That it's like too generic. You know what I mean? So my question is, can you code something that just says coagulation defect in the assessment? And the warfarin was like, I understand your point. That was kind of like the meat for it. But my real question is, can I code, if it's coagulation defect in the assessment, can I code it just like that? Or can I not code it because it's not specific enough as to what type or more specificity? Make sense?
Yes, it does. And I have to ask Sharon. Sharon, are you aware of coding any coding clinic that would in any way impact coding this that way? So she's shaking her head. So Linda, we want to look into that and add. I realize that you've added this as an afterthought because we're not aware of a coding clinic. But we don't want to give an answer that's not complete. So we will revisit this question next week because we want to look and see if there is a coding clinic. Now, The D68.9, is there a coding clinic notation next to D68.9? Linda? Okay, so your answer to my question says, I don't know. I know there is a coding clinic 2016 Q1. But is that coding clinic 2016 Q1 next to the D68.9 in the tabular? You don't have your book with you. Okay. So I think Sharon is looking at Coding Clinic right now. So I want to move to, I think you had another question. Was it, I saw earlier that you had typed in a question, Linda. So I'm going to go back and see. Okay, so I'm going to actually copy your question and I'm going to put it in the presentation. And so bear with me for a second. So Sharon's going to look at that coding clinic that you referred to in reference to your question there. And we are going to add the question that you typed into chat to the slide base here. And so just bear with us for a second.
Okay, so I found the coding clinic that you're referring to. And the answer after reading the coding clinic 2016 first quarter, the answer to your question is it is okay. It is acceptable to code coagulation defect just based on the documentation of coagulation defect in the assessment. So that coding clinic, the question, you know how coding clinic works, people ask a question and they answer. The question was, should bleeding due to therapeutic anticoagulant be coded as a bleeding disorder or D68 categories? So it's different here. The question is bleeding due to anticoagulant. Okay, that's the coding scenario. That's the term that was documented. So coding clinic answer was, for the most part, bleeding disorder or coagulation defects must be specifically diagnosed and documented by the providers in order to assign codes in category D68. Okay, so if the documentation was only bleeding due to a drug, okay, so that's not good enough to code as coagulation defects, because coding clinic once again stated coagulation defects must be specifically documented by the provider. So for your coding scenario, if coagulation defects was documented by the providers, then we're good to go.
And I think, Linda, in your verbal portion where you said you were going to clarify, I think you, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said, I had heard, right? In other words, other people had told you something. Do I recall correctly that you'd said Coder Coach? Is that a publication or a person? Person, okay. So, we always have to be careful in who we listen to, and what I mean, I'm not trying to disparage anybody. You should be careful when you listen to us as well. Just because we say something doesn't always mean that it's right. Okay, we are going to back up our statements with as much authoritative resources as we can, but certainly there has been an occasion where there was some additional resource that maybe changed our advice and we weren't aware of that additional resource. So nobody's perfect. So my point is not to disparage anybody, but no matter how much you trust somebody, and you had obviously at least were aware of the coding clinic. I don't know if you read it, but you were aware of the coding clinic, so you had gone to that step. You know what I mean? So that is very good. And so and this scenario plays out a lot in coding, where Sharon was mentioning the bleeding due to or whatever. It's like a one-way street. The point is to code coagulation defect, you need that specifically stated. So it's not bleeding due to that you could automatically go to coagulation defect. There would be a coding scenario for bleeding due to, but it may not necessarily be coagulation defect without the provider specifically stating it. Okay. So hopefully that helps. And another question from Linda that she typed in chat here. Can you code Z79.4 without a diagnosis of diabetes? And she says, I think yes. And do you have to have the name of the insulin to code it? I have heard mixed info that there is a rule that you need the name of the insulin in order to code it. So diabetic patient on insulin wouldn't be allowed to code to Z79.4. Thanks for this forum of no judgment. And I left this in there because you typed it in a chat where all on the web conference could see it. But I also want people to, watching on demand who may not be on the live web conference to know this. So thanks for the forum of no judgment. I feel so dumb asking some of these basic questions, but it's good for me to get it solidified. First of all, the next dumb question that you ask, Linda, would be the first. I don't recall ever having a question from you where I rolled my eyes and said, "Oh boy!" No, your questions are not dumb. Your questions are really, mid to higher level questions most times. And so, but the important thing for everybody to understand is this is a no judgment zone. There are no dumb questions, and I know that sounds cliche, but we are here for every single person that has a question. Not everybody is at the same level. Not everybody has the same experience. Some people, have trouble understanding certain concepts. So there is, this is, if we wanted to phrase it differently other than a no judgment zone, it is an immunity zone. You're granted immunity from anything. We want every question answered, for everybody. There is not a question on the planet that relates to risk adjustment that we don't want to answer. So, and Linda put it well with the no judgment. We want to make sure that everybody gets clarity. And Linda, you're a very active participant. You're here just about every week. Some days you don't have questions, but we count on we can count on it when you do that you're going to come and ask them. And especially these two questions tonight. How many other people might have these questions? These are very good questions, and you forget the no judgment. You might be the catalyst for 5, 10, 50, 100 people reaching clarity on something that maybe they had struggled with. So, and that's the benefit of our weekly Q&A, where somebody might not even have been able to formulate the question that they had yet, and then all of a sudden they see it and they said, "Oh wow, I was wondering the same thing." So, no, Linda, please, never feel inhibited. Nobody should feel inhibited, and your questions are very on point and very good. So let's see what Sharon has to say on this.
I think that's a great question. So the first part, can you code Z79.4 without a diagnosis of diabetes? And do you have to have the name of the insulin to code it? So that's both questions there. So the first part is it is not recommended unless your organization said it is okay to capture long-term use of insulin without provider even mentioning diabetes. And the reason is, if there's not a diagnosis of diabetes on the note, that means you get the insulin from the medication list, all right? That would be the most likely the scenario where you would have an insulin without a diagnosis of diabetes. And if your organization said it's not okay to use medication list whatsoever, then it will not be a good idea to pick up something from the medication list, right? And another reason is, I know most part of the world agree that diabetes is not a condition that will be resolved, right? It cannot be resolved. And if diabetes was not mentioned on the note and medication insulin is on the list, how do we know the list is currently up to date? How do we know the patient is still currently on insulin on the date of encounter? If we don't know that insulin is current and there is not a diagnosis of diabetes, diabetes could be a historic condition. It could be the patient could have once upon a time get admitted to the hospital, blood sugar a little high, hospital use insulin on a sliding scale to temporarily control the blood sugar, but the patient could maybe never receive a diagnosis of diabetes. So it is not a good idea to do that unless your organization said, yeah, it's okay, insulin's on medication, let's go ahead and pick that up. And also remember, this is for long-term use of insulin. Okay, if it is temporary or sliding scale, you cannot assign a code Z79.4. So 1 second.
Now, in instances, I do want to point out, it does say diabetic patient on insulin. So that does confirm the fact that the patient is diabetic. Okay. So in this, in the quoted statement there, diabetic patient on insulin would indicate that the patient has diabetes. But now, as Sharon pointed out, not only do we not know if the insulin is current, without dates or without, what it was prescribed for, but also if we didn't have that diabetic patient and we just had insulin on the medication list, you have to remember that medication lists are often not entered into the note by the provider. They are often pulled in from historical files on something that was prescribed or given. Okay, and as Sharon said, there are times where insulin is given, in a one-time dose or a very short period of time, surrounding, certain events such as surgeries, and so that would not be long-term use of insulin. So you remember what Sharon said about the medication list and it not necessarily always, unless you can confirm that it's current, you can't confirm that insulin is currently being prescribed or taken by the patient. Medication lists are very rarely, you see a medication list that has 20 medications on it. Yeah, I can almost guarantee you in 99.9% of the cases, the provider didn't sit there and enter those medications in that encounter. They were pulled in to the record from historical files. And so you have to understand records and EHRs and how they are populated and what information is entered in that encounter by a provider versus pulled into the record and not entered by the provider. And so in the absence of that diabetic patient on insulin, then it would clearly be a case, just if we saw insulin and we assign the code for diabetes, we are making a medical conclusion that is not in the record.
And so the first part of that question was, or the first question was insulin without diagnosis of diabetes. The second part question was diabetic patient on insulin. Is it good enough? Do we need to see the name of the insulin? The answer is no. As long as provider documented clearly patient is on insulin without saying it's on sliding scale or temporary, then it is appropriate to capture the code Z79.4 without the name of the insulin documented.
And I've heard a lot of crazy things, and I thought I heard it all. I have never heard anybody utter that you need the name of the insulin in order to code it. And so you're saying you've heard mixed info. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier. You got to be careful who you listen to sometimes, because, here's the thing. If somebody said that to me, they would have a great reduction in my respect for them and my confidence in their knowledge. Okay, if somebody who is in maybe a more vulnerable position, lack of experience in a certain area, this, that, and the other thing, and hears that, and is vulnerable and apt to take that advice. Now they've proliferated something that's just not true. So I would love to. I mean, sometimes there's more behind something than we know, and I'd love to hear the person who told you that, what their rationale is for that. But that is bordering on one of the more ridiculous things I've ever heard. So, very rarely do you see. Now, here's one of the possibilities. There's insulin, and then there's diabetic aid drugs that are not insulin. Okay, so the person may have been talking about something along those lines. I'm not really sure, but that is we were talking about no judgment zone. I do judge people who tell others things that are completely incorrect and proliferate them as fact. So, which is a completely different scenario than asking a question in a Q&A that is designed for Q&A. But so does that help, Linda? So we are up on the hour. We got started a little bit late, but so we can certainly go over. But we are at the point where if anybody has a question, I'm not sure. I think I might have seen one scroll by in chat that maybe we didn't get to. If you asked a question in chat, we ask you to either retype it or you may unmute and ask your question. Chat scrolls consistently throughout the web conference, and while we're presenting, we can't stop presenting to just sit and analyze a question. So if there was a question that somebody else asked that has not been answered, we encourage you to go ahead and either type it back in the chat now, or you can unmute and ask a question. Do we have any questions? Anybody? Just remember, it's a no judgment zone. And, if you don't have a question now, maybe you'll have one for next week. Remember, you can send your questions in advance to ratraining@compliantcodingsystems.com. The advantage of doing that is we can place it in the presentation slides, and if there is some reference that we need to utilize to support an answer, such as a coding clinic, such as a guideline, something like that, then we can always get that prepared to include with the answer. So again, great questions, and this is why we're here on Tuesday evenings. Of course, this is Thursday because of a reschedule, but this is why we're here, folks. And we we want to make sure that nobody is in the dark about anything. We want to always bring everybody to as much clarity and understanding as possible, and that's why we're here. So I don't see any other questions in chat. I don't hear anybody jumping in with any, so we will be concluding this edition of Risk Adjustment Weekly Q&A. And again, you can submit your questions to RA, as in risk adjustment, RA training at compliantcodingsystems.com. And we thank you for spending this portion of your evening with us, and we look forward to seeing you the next time you're able to join us, either for Q&A or weekly chart review or CDI forum or any of our other many web conferences. And again, if you have questions, please reach out so we can get those answered for you. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We look forward to seeing you the next time you're able to join us. Thanks.